Godzilla, 1998. Is this New York City at its peak?
1998,
I think it was
yes.
all downhill from then, because obviously we get some shots of the World Trade Center in this movie. There's a weird line. I guess it's not as weird as I thought it was, but like in the report, they're calling this city the worst, or they're calling this the worst disaster in the city since the World Trade Center bombing.
Yeah.
And it's like, yeah, they're not talking about 9/11 because this is before 9/11, but there was in the early 90s, someone bombed the World Trade Center. I think they just had like a car or something, but I'm not really sure. But I remember hearing like a few people died in that. And I'm like, but this, like half the city was destroyed. Wouldn't this be way worse? But then I looked up and there were like thousands of injuries or something. It's like, okay, I'll let that line slide. But yeah, I think this is New York City more or less at its peak. The New York Knicks were still relevant. The New York Yankees were in the middle of their dynasty. The New York Rangers had just won the Stanley Cup in 1994. The World Trade Center were still standing.
And this is like post-Seinfeld, too.
Yeah, Seinfeld and Friends are like the biggest shows on television. Which, I mean, there's always shows set in New York City, so maybe that's not a super big deal. But yeah, I think this is basically peak New York City.
Roland Emmerich was just lucky that he captured it right at the perfect time. And then
Exactly.
covered it in water.
Well, it's also, I mean, you say that, but so obviously the city was going to change after 9/11, but I will say, I don't think what I'm about to say has that much to do with 9/11, but New York, for years, decades even, the most iconic skyline in the world, right? Empire State Building, Chrysler Building, World Trade Center, all of that stuff. Now, if you look at the skyline, it's like hideous, and it's like the Empire State Building and the Chrysler Building are like the only good looking buildings. Everything else is just like a boring, tall, thin tower.
Yeah.
And it's just like, it's an ugly skyline now. And back in 98, it looked awesome. A lot of people don't like the new World Trade Center building. I actually think it's probably a better looking building than the original World Trade Center. Although seeing the two of them was really the kind of the appeal.
I've never even seen it.
that
I'm gonna look
on
it
the
up.
skyline. Yeah, One World Trade is what it's called. It's like, it's kind of generic postmodern skyscraper, but it looks decent. I mean,
Oh, yeah. Looks all right.
the original World Trade Centers were kind of boring buildings to look at. They were just super tall, and there were two of them. So New York has absolutely butchered its skyline in the last 15 years or so, and it's... someone needs... Someone needs to apologize. It just looks awful.
They do,
now,
yeah.
I think.
Stop building fucking flat, tall skyscrapers. Put some flair in there.
I don't want to sound like one of those assholes who's like in London, like, oh, we can't build any buildings above 10 stories tall. Like, no, you need some modern structures, obviously, but at least have them look neat. Like, that's actually one thing that London, I think, has done a neat job of, is the modern skyscrapers. They're actually interesting looking buildings.
They
The
are.
Gherkin is awesome. The Gherkin's iconic.
They are, but I think both built, like, yeah, I mean,
I think a lot of
skyline.
people hate them because it contrasts with St. Paul's and all this wonderful old architecture.
Well, and also, I think it was the Gherkin. It's either the Gherkin or the Shard. The windows were positioned in such a way that it was like melting people's cars.
Yes. No, that was the walkie-talkie. That's why they put the black covering
yes.
over one side of it. Yes, that's true. So clearly some design flaws involved still, but...